Hello and welcome to Beyond Organic Wine. I'm Adam Huss, coming to you from Piscinas Ranch in California. Thank you so much for listening. I have an announcement. Every time somebody says that, including myself, I remember being in summer camp, and when we would do morning announcements, the entire room full of children would start screaming, announcements, announcements, announcements. We sold our cow, we sold our cow, we have no need for your bull now. And then announcements would continue. Okay, so here's the announcement. I created a Google group called Beyond Organic Wine. You can join it by signing into Google Groups, and I'm sorry, it's a Google group. There's probably other ways to do this, but it's incredibly easy through Google, and you do need a Google account, or you need to somehow associate your email with a Google account. But anyway, you sign into Google Groups and search for Beyond Organic Wine, all one word, and then send a request to join. It's that easy. Now, why would you want to do this? For three reasons. One, because you have knowledge and resources to share about wine growing and or making from a beyond organic, regenerative, ecological perspective. Two, because you have questions about wine growing and or making from a beyond organic, regenerative, ecological perspective. And three, because community is the foundation of resilience. I started this podcast to find and build a community of people with shared values with whom I could share ideas and more. And you know, it's grown and become something awesome. And more people are reaching out to me for the same reason. I've been receiving questions from listeners all over the globe who care deeply about making their wine growing and winemaking as ecological, regenerative, better than organic, and delicious as possible, but who find themselves alone in their local region without a community with like values and goals to support and mentor them, exchange resources, and share knowledge. So I hope this can be that community virtually. This will be an open forum for questions, discussions, and shared resources and knowledge with the goals of being helpful, constructive, and kind in our exchanges, and even inspirational if possible. This will be a place to go deep and technical, share evidence and evidence-based ideas, go easy on opinions, and ask questions and question everything humbly. The goal is to grow more in harmony with local ecologies and to make more delicious wine, and to build a foundation for resilient, diverse, and beautiful local wine cultures. And we define wine as any fermented beverage that includes any fruit, not just grapes. So yes, ciders, vermouths, meads, quote-unquote fruit wines, and everything, including grapes. Again, just sign into Google Groups, find the Beyond Organic Wine group, and send a request to join. I look forward to learning together with you there. Now, I feel like I waste a lot of time introducing guests who then go on to do a much better job of introducing themselves. So for my guest today, I'm just going to let Daniel Hess of Convivium Imports tell you about himself. And he does an incredible job. You'll find out why I wanted to talk to him, of course, but spoiler, it's because he's an awesome guy doing something cool in wine. But one thing I will say is that you should definitely stay tuned to the end because I have new and very special closing music that will haunt your soul in the very best way. Enjoy.
Yeah.
Welcome. Thanks for doing this, Dan.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Could you introduce yourself and your company?
Sure. So my name is Daniel Hess, and the name of my company is Convivium Imports. I don't know if you want context into the name of the company as well, or just...
Yeah. So you import wine.
Yes, sorry. Yeah,
No,
Convivium Imports is
just
a
saying.
wine import company.
I mean, it would be really weird if it wasn't on this podcast, but yes.
True. Yeah.
Why Convivium?
So yeah, no, that's usually the first question I get when I mention my company, besides how is it spelled? And really, when I was thinking of names, I wanted something that spoke to me and like my background and what I cared about. And I'm a big history nerd, and Convivium, I kind of found it as I kind of thought about what mattered to me in the world of wine. And Convivium is the Latin word used in ancient Rome for essentially the first dinner parties that had women and men together and having them drink wine and share stories and learn about things. And I thought that was just really cool. It's where the word convivial comes from. And I just really like that it had a historical reference, and it pretty much is like the first democratic kind of broad group of people talking around wine in history.
Right. That we know of, or that in
Oh yeah.
West history. Yeah.
Yes, that's a very good point. Correct. In our Eurocentric point of view, for sure.
um, well, what is your story? Like, what is your, how did you get into
Yeah.
this? 'Cause I know that
So,
you had
yeah.
another life before all this. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So, like a lot of people, or I guess some people, wine wasn't really the first calling I had. I guess I moved out to LA 18 years ago and worked in the entertainment industry as a writer. But I always had a passion and love for, I guess you could say, things that tapped into culture. It's also what I like. The kind of stories I would work on were more historical things, things that were a little bit about the world at large. That's because of my own background. I grew up in Europe. I was born in Spain. I was raised in Switzerland. My dad is Swiss and my mom is Guatemalan. So the kind of pretty broad, diverse international background and allowed me to always kind of it it led me to always want to think of the world more broadly and how I can kind of connect every people together, because I got to see it day to day when I had my Swiss dad and my Guatemalan mom kind of interacting with each other, very different types of people. And at first I thought it was like, yeah, no, I'll just write stories about people from around the world. And then eventually I connected the dots and realized that I wanted to use like a more hands-on way of connecting people, and with like a product, with something that people really enjoy and can kind of learn more about cultures. And I was a wine geek, I always joke around, if you're a writer, alcohol usually is a bit of a hobby of sorts for every writer. So yeah, I spent a lot of time, you know, not just drinking it, but like learning about it. I took like wine courses. I did the Court of Master Sommelier, the first two levels, kind of for fun. Um, and then just through a series of just really expanding my knowledge and my background, I then decided to shift gears and move into the world of wine. And that kind of launched me into doing a lot of the things that people do in wine. I worked in primarily in sales. I worked as a sales rep and as a broker for some larger companies, and then helping out some smaller wineries. And really, a lot of it was just the sales, and then a little bit of marketing, and just kind of connecting people to wine, whether it was the consumers with a winery or wineries with buyers. But I realized my little background in storytelling allowed me to kind of connect the story of the wineries and the winemakers with the people who would be buying and drinking the wine. And that's why I decided to start an import company.
Yeah, I mean, I have this sense. Well, I have a sense that being able to tell a story would help you sell wine. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's undoubtedly an important skill. I don't think it's any surprise, or I'm not saying anything too controversial when I say that a lot of people care more about the story behind a product than the product itself, and wine is no different. Like, I do believe that obviously people have preferences in what they drink, obviously, and some wines taste better or worse to people. So obviously what's in the bottle is important, but if you do this long enough, you realize just how powerful a story can be. And I think that's evidenced most clearly when you go visit a winery, when you go visit or speak to a winemaker. It's like the most classic story of, people going to whatever wine country or whatever country they want to go visit wineries, and they fall in love with the region or a certain producer or a certain style of wine. And and it's, something that they didn't even think they liked before. it's not that their palate changed overnight, right? It's really just that they had they were immersed in the world and got to hear the story and learn more about it. And so that is, I think, what has always been fascinating to me is like, how do you translate that? How do you get more people having that experience? Because not everyone can just go traipsing about Europe, around Europe, learning more
Mm.
about every little region in Europe. And so that's a really kind of the origin story of Convivium as well. The other origin story is I felt that there were a lot of regions and places all over Europe that where the winemakers don't have the opportunity to tell this story to as many people as they deserve to. And so it's why my portfolio is really built out of regions and areas and countries even that don't have that kind of access to the broad wine consumer.
Yeah. What do you look for? Like, what are your? I mean, do you have criteria? What do you? How do you decide who's in your book?
Yeah, I mean, I think every importer kind of sets up criteria and then they kind of tweak it as they go along. I have a very unique set of criteria. And it's one that I still adhere to, even despite how crazy it sounds. I basically have decided to only import from countries where I speak the language. But in my yeah, it sounds ridiculous, but in my case, I speak five languages, so it kind of gives me a pretty broad range. So I do import from Spanish speaking countries, French speaking countries, and German speaking countries, which are the primary languages I can speak. So that gives me a lot to work with, but more like, I guess, more specifically, I'm looking for regions within those countries: Spain, France, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, that don't get a lot of love, that just you know get a little overlooked, which is hard to do. It's hard to overlook regions these days because there's just so much importing happening that there's every region gets a little bit of uh, seems like every region has a pop of popularity at some point, but
Right.
there's still yeah, there's still gems to be found. And more importantly, I want to find people doing interesting things that are a little bit, I guess, outside the box, even for those regions, like a region that is maybe even known for a little bit outside the box winemaking, like Languedoc or something like that. I like finding the producers that are doing something even more unique or esoteric. And
Yeah.
so that way they're getting their voice, their story told as well.
I noticed as I looked through what you have on your website that, I mean, every producer I looked at, which was all of them, is either organic or biodynamic, or like maybe there's one that's
Mm-hmm.
transitioning on the way to that. Is that a
Mm-hmm.
criteria?
It is, yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that. That is a criteria that I kind of. It's kind of the baseline for me. I just want to make sure, even though, and I'm talking to a bit of an expert here about and the type in farming. This is by no means an area of expertise of mine, but the more I speak to these producers, I guess you could say I don't need. I don't want these wineries. Don't need my wineries that I work with to be certified and have like all the boxes checked like I'm some sort of government agency. um, for me
Yeah.
it's pretty for me it's just like a baseline to work with. If you're saying you're working organic or biodynamic, it at the very least I can kind of put that, bring that to my buyers and my consumers and say, hey, we know that they're not using pesticides and chemicals in the vineyard. And that at the very least I think is something we can all agree is, we're trying to keep that down. Like we're the idea, if you're working as a little bit of a startup in wine, I think you should probably be looking at the type of farming that's happening. So the more time I spend in Europe looking at these wineries, the more I learn about the nuances, and you know, it becomes less important to me that they check boxes and just like more or ask the right questions. What are they using? Are they and I guess in general, like I something that I really love is just the pushing for biodiversity, and which farms are more polycultural, right? I like when I go visit a winery and there's not more than just grapes being farmed, and that's something I'm looking for more and more. I'm like, are you just like, are you just a winery growing grapes, and or are you like really looking at what your ecosystem it wants to have in its soil and growing more things? That's super cool.
Hmm. Are you? Yeah, I mean, are grapes the only thing that you're looking for?
I work with ciders as well, so
Yeah,
apples, yeah,
yeah,
which are
yeah.
tasty.
I saw that. I mean, you
Yeah,
you you said you're finding these sort of obscure regions. I feel like all of Switzerland is kind of an obscure region in the wine world. Is that fair?
yeah.
Is that a fair assessment? A fair statement?
Well,
And
yeah,
do
that's
do you have like the biggest Swiss book on in California or what?
yeah. I mean, I haven't counted it, but I probably am. And if I'm not, I'm certainly one of the biggest ones. I think there's one other portfolio that um, is like is also geared towards Swiss wine, but and he's actually related to a winemaker in Switzerland, so he's kind of importing his family's wines, which is cool too because he's a true ambassador for his winery, Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean that was again like one of the original missions for me as someone who's Swiss, despite not sounding Swiss, but I did grow up in Switzerland. Uh, and my family still lives there. I saw the kind of like the vibrant wine culture and how it was evolving, becoming, focusing more on what you would call like natural wine broadly, obviously, but more specifically, kind of, you know, lower intervention, a little bit more terroir driven. Um, and I realized no one was getting to taste any of it in California or in the United States, and for me that was a bit of a bummer because the Swiss wines are very good, also very expensive, of course, and that's one of the big barriers to it. But I just felt that there's a whole dynamic. It's not like just like you said, like not just a dynamic region that's being overlooked. That's a whole country in Europe, and it's
Yeah.
not like it's a country that's if you told me like Bulgarian wine is being overlooked, would believe you, but I would also understand why maybe it would be overlooked. But in the case of Swiss wine, that's the country that's smack in the middle between Germany, Austria, Italy, and France. So it's not like it's far away from like very well respected winemaking. In fact, it's right there. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's been really fun to be able to bring that and showcase how diverse it is as well. That's been a real just something very special for me, and certainly one of the big things that I've wanted to do with Convivium.
Well, I know I've been very fortunate to try several wines from different producers that you represent. And off the top of my head, I can't tell you stories, but I remember some of them being some of the more unique wines I'd tried in my life. Do you have some?
That's
Can you talk about some of the stories and the people that you represent?
Oh yeah, I mean gladly. This is I mean, I don't want to like turn this into just a like a an ad for for the wines in my book, but yeah, I mean, so I've got a couple, and some of these are really, um, like I said, like showcasing the history of wine and kind of certain things that really you forget about. So I've got this producer that I distribute called Domaine de Clos-Vallon. Um, it's a mother and daughter team that basically, they took over an estate in outside of Fougères in the 70s. Well, the mother bought the estate, Catherine Rock, and she basically, yeah, just turned into a biodynamic winery in the 70s, which is pretty early for that, and realized that she had this like special kind of cool climate site. So she started planting and petitioned the authorities in Languedoc to plant Pinot Noir, Riesling, cool climate grapes in Languedoc, which is obviously a warm climate region. And then she makes really unique wines, like a Blanc de Noir, using her Pinot Noir. She presses it direct, makes it a white wine, and blends in some Riesling. So it's a Pinot Noir Blanc de Noir with Riesling blended in from Languedoc. Crazy.
Wild. Wild.
Um, and yeah, and then they also have a really cool little site that's been around for 100 years. It's been planted with 20, 30 different varietals, some of which they don't know. It's walled. It's like a walled garden. So Phylloxera has never touched this vineyard, and it's basically they create this very special field blend, where they co-ferment everything. They pick every vine, no matter what it is, these 20, 30 varietals on the same day, and then just co-ferment it together and create like a true, field blend. Um,
Hmm.
and every year it tastes completely different, obviously. So, that's
And
a
that
good example of someone doing something really unique in a region where there's already a lot of unique things.
that's really cool. Yeah, that's so they're all own rooted varieties.
Yeah. Yeah, unrated
That's
varieties.
cool.
I saw, I met up with them a few months ago, and they actually told me something really cool, a little detail I didn't know uh, until then, which was, there's certain vines in that vineyard that are still unidentified. What it
Hmm.
is exactly, like they don't really know. So they basically have clippings. They have people come from the different, like, uh, universities that study, viticulture, and when they are trying to match up a vine that they don't really know what its heritage is, they cross reference it with some of the vines in their vineyard. They're one of like a couple, like there's like a dozen vineyards in France that has vines where it could be an extinct vine. Like it's their way of being like, well, let's go check this vineyard. This might be the vine that we're looking for as we like go through the parentage of this other thing that we're studying. So it's a bit of a, historical artifact as well, like because they have vines there that still haven't fully been identified what it is.
That's really cool. I was
Yeah.
reading about one where they were using chestnut barrels, I
Yeah,
think in
Stevie
Penedes.
Guibert in Penedis. Yeah, that's actually becoming. It's funny because so chestnut barrels, using chestnut wood was a little more common um, back in the day. I guess whatever back in the day, several decades ago, up to a century ago, in Spain, that was an aging vessel that was used more commonly in Penedis and all over Spain, really. Until they started, in my opinion, inexplicably wanting to use more American oak. Um, but yeah,
What you talking
but
about?
yeah, so yeah, sorry. um, but
Just
the
kidding.
chestnut barrels are very fascinating because this is a producer like a couple other ones that I've heard about who are trying to tap into that heritage of Spanish winemaking that has existed, you know, before the grand bodegas of Rioja became popular. Um, it's really the more I spend time in Europe, the more I find myself inspired by the winemakers who are looking beyond like the the era of wine, of the great wines, whenever you would call it, the 70s and 80s or whatever, where like wine became such a big thing and scores became important, and really looking at old ways of doing things. Obviously this isn't anything new because Georgian wines, orange wine, it's a very popular
Yeah,
style with the kids or whatever. But that's an ancient method. But it's really cool
yeah,
to see it in regions where you don't realize that there's still that happening, that that's happening too, and so yeah, aging things in amphora. One of the producers I have in Spain, uh, Juan Leandro Romero is the name of my winemaker that I work with. That he's in a region called Extremadura, which is a very arid. very obscure kind of hidden away region north of Sevilla by the Portuguese border. Not known. It's like just like a lot of um, bulk grape growing happening there, but he's been doing organic farming, like, it's his family estate, and he's been farming organically since the 90s, and not irrigating, which is tough to do in a very arid landscape. But the thing that really like blew me away was when he told me that he makes his skin contact wine. He ages it in amphora made by a local, guy who makes potter, and he makes the amphora for him using the clay soil of Extremadura. He makes it, and then he ages it in the amphora that are lined with beeswax from local
Mm.
bees. Um, and that's where you're just like, okay, like I'm in. I just get really, I get so excited when I hear things like that.
Yeah, that's really great. I want to ask you about one more. Clodecim,
Yeah,
is that am I pronouncing that
yeah,
correctly?
yeah. Plodicim, Elodie Aubert, wonderful winemaker. She's up there in the high altitude hills, mountains, above, just east of the Rhone Valley. When you go east of the Rhone Valley, altitude climbs the region, kind of like the Drôme that they call it, Mont
Mm,
Ventoux. Basically, you're heading away from the Rhone Valley, heading into the what they would call the Rhone Alp. Um, so it's like
hmm.
transitional alpine terroir, but not quite. But she's got these
Yeah,
really amazing vineyards up in altitude, but they're still Rhone wines, but they're up high. Like, it's really cool.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it looks just a photo of it is kind of fun. There's like donkeys and sheep and mountains and like a villa and vines. Yeah,
Yeah.
I want.
Yeah, her neighbor is a castle. Like, there's actually like a castle in the like
Oh, maybe that's what I'm seeing.
her
Yeah.
she's got her estate, and then there's like a little mountain that is right now, a hill that's next to her estate, and it's her only neighbor. So you look around and there's no real, she doesn't have other wineries next to her. It's just a little village, but then next to her is this castle, and it's owned by the local government, so no one lives there. It's kind of used, I think, for events, or probably just sits there for the most part. But yeah, standard European wineries where your neighbors, or you're a castle yourself. Usually, there's castles
Right.
somewhere very
You're a
nearby.
chateau. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Nice. So, how has business been lately?
Well, that's the big question on everyone's mind, I guess, these days. I think, it's the wine business is, I think, in an interesting place. I am pretty, I look at it from a different place than a lot of people, because I'm a young company. My company is only 3 years old, so I don't have a
Yeah.
lot of history, sales history, or what, that I can kind of draw on and be like, wow, this has been a huge drop, or oh, this has been the worst year ever. I'm still building the business and getting these sort of obscure wines out into the market. So for me, like a lot of startups or whatever you want to call it, I feel like business is good, but could be better, because where I do see some things change from where like how, since it's prior to having my own company, I did work in wine sales. I do think that there is contraction, in terms of how many restaurants and how many places there are in the market that are buying certain types of wines. The wine lists are getting smaller. And then I think, while California still, I think, kind of leads the way in terms of willing to take risks on unique wines, I definitely think that there is a little more, like, people are a little more risk averse than they want to admit, just because it's expensive and risky. I keep using the word risk, but it's risky to bring in an unknown producer or a region that people don't know. And despite the fact that I do think consumers find that very exciting,
Hmm.
I do think the the consumer preferences have shifted, hopefully temporarily a little bit, to what do I know, what's affordable. I'm just going to order the things that I like, and that
Hmm.
in turn makes wine buying a little conservative
Yeah.
as a whole. You know,
Yeah. So, I mean,
so
that seems like it would be tough for you because it seems like your book is more of that, like, oh, let's try something new. Am I wrong to think that way, or where do you see yourself
yeah.
fitting in that?
Yeah, well, the good news is it my entire portfolio isn't just the completely esoteric things. I do have some what I guess you could call wines that are a little more broadly applicable and have I do have there are wines, and to be honest, no matter how I guess weird or crazy the stories are, or the winemaking approach, or the grapes sound, like I work with a lot of indigenous grapes, or grapes that people haven't heard of. um, I make a big point of only really wanting to focus on wineries that make accessible wines. And that's something that's really, really important to me, because my first job in the wine world was working for a large distributor that had only like primarily conventional wines, big production wines. And I kind of got to see the process of trying to get people to be more adventurous is not like an overnight, like, hey, let's jump from them drinking their like grocery store Chardonnay to some Blanc de Noir, Pinot Noir with Riesling blended in from Languedoc. There's something in between that has to happen, and the way
Hmm.
to do that is to make sure that the wine that they're trying actually tastes good, and is consistent, and just is accessible, like that there's something that they can latch onto, that is familiar enough that they'll be like, I feel good about ordering another glass, or buying, or buy, bringing that bottle home with me. That's really important to me, because otherwise, yes, it would be impossible to have a business like mine, to just say, I'm just going to bring in stuff with crazy stories but also taste really weird, like that is like a 1-2 punch that is very hard
Hmm.
for me to just make work. But for me, the other important side of things is does this taste good, and is an average consumer, if you like tasted a consumer, would they be like totally lost, or will they be like, oh, that tastes good, it kind of reminds me of a Pinot Grigio or whatever, and you're like, okay, I'll take it. I actually don't mind when someone says, oh, that kind of reminds me of, insert
Right.
their favorite wine here, because I'm like, all right, if that's what you think it tastes like and you're willing to run with it, then great. But let me tell you the background behind it, because it is not that,
That's great. Yeah. Well, I mean, but in addition to tasting good, I don't know, yummy.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
um,
that's the correct verbiage. Yes, yummy.
it seems like I mean, tell me if you see this or if I'm just, projecting my insecurities. It seems like novelty is a big driver in the market now. And it's almost like or it was, or it's the other major driver besides going to the same thing over and over and over again, like the old familiar. So there's like the old familiar crowd, and then there's the like I never want to try the same thing twice crowd. And there's like seems to be very difficult for a producer to consistently just turn out a quality product if they're not one of the Camuses or whatever it is, Dow, or
Yeah,
like whatever the old
yeah,
familiar is. It seems like they
yeah,
just need to change their label once a month and produce a whole new
yeah,
wine every year. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah,
Am I
yeah.
wrong about
I mean, I get what you're saying, and I certainly, and that, I think that's just like kind of a tale as old as time in almost any industry, right?
that? Sure. Okay.
In the entertainment industry, it's like you're like, I just want to see like something I've never seen before, or like people just want to see the franchises or sequels. It's like there's always,
Right.
it's like anything. I think, yes, those extremes are the do. I mean, I don't even know if they're extremes. I think they kind of go hand in hand, but you're probably right that I think that those are the two kind of roads that or paths to kind of consistent kind of, just in wine specifically, I would say the way you probably get the most, you know FaceTime with a buyer, if you're talking about just purely like, getting tastings on the books and selling wine, I would say it's like either you're a distributor who has like the thing that everyone wants, and you can come in, you're like, guess what, I've got the thing that everyone wants, you want to taste it? And they're like, yeah, yeah, of course, come in. Or it's like, hey, I have a brand new thing that you've never seen before, and it is and if you can do that consistently, then you'll, I think, yes, you probably have a better shot at getting in front of the buyers more consistently. And if you're somewhere in between where you're like, hey, remember you liked this once, I've had the new vintage, and you're like, okay, I kind of liked it that one time, I don't really need to try it again, right? Maybe that's that. But in the end, like, the journey of like trying to get, everyone's, I think, trying to take a wine that is super different and or original or unknown, and get it in front of as many people as possible, right? So, in the end, you're yes, it benefits me or anyone to have always have something new, but
Uh-huh.
I don't want to leave behind any wines that just somehow, I don't feel, I feel like every wine deserves to have like a broad appeal, if it's in my book, I guess is what I'm saying. So yeah, I don't, it's but yeah, I mean, I personally, I think, looking at it a different way, I think it also matters if you're an importer or a distributor. What is more? What is your? I guess, what is interesting to you? Like, what do you? Why are you doing it? If you really are starting a distribution company or an import company to try to really build brands, I guess you could say, like, it's, if you're in the brand building business, um, then yeah, I mean, that becomes your focus, is really just figuring out ways to partner up with accounts and build a brand and really just make things big, because then, oh, once it's big, people will want it, and it'll be easy to sell it to any account.
Yeah.
um, but for some people, it's a little more exciting to just constantly bring in new and weird stuff, and that's a lot more work, but it's a little more fun.
Do you have any recommendations for producers? Like, I mean, yeah, I don't know how else to put that, but like,
That's I that this so that's always a tricky question to me, because you know I'm a person that just, I kind of taste and explore a little bit on the fly. I'm a little different than a lot of people who do what I do, because a lot of people, they 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 see, they're trying to taste things from like specific, from regions and from producers that are well known, and trying the cuvées that they think are like the ones that people are raving about. And this is, I'm, going back to what you were saying, I'm the person who, when I go to a restaurant or I'm wherever at a bar, I will just order the thing that I've never heard of 100% of the time. And I just want to try it.
yeah,
And then once I've tried it, I kind of just like, like kind of lock it away, as in like, oh, I got to try this grape, or I got to try something from, you know, some random, Greek island that I didn't even really know had vines, something like that. And then, I probably file away, do a little bit of research when I get home or when I have time. And then I kind of move on, because like I know I have to like focus on my book, and my book is its own thing. So yeah, I guess I wish I had a better answer. I mean, I don't know, I like the stuff that a lot of people like, and Vinate, like, you know, the island wines of Spain, stuff like
oh,
that.
nice.
Yeah.
Have you felt any of the sort of, I know, like, at least I've seen this in the US as more of a push to drink local. Have you felt any, I don't know, maybe even backlash about that as an importer, or? any impact at all
Uh,
from that, or how do you feel about that?
I don't really feel a backlash. I think there's like room for everything. So I certainly know that there's places, I talk to the wine director and they say, oh, we want to focus our menu more on, California wines. And I'm all for it, because I also believe in local winemaking. It's the irony an anecdote I always like to tell is, when I was in Switzerland a couple years ago when I was first seeking out my core group of producers to bring in and like kind of nailing them down. One of the producers I really wanted to bring over, she she goes like, "Wait, why do you want to import Swiss wine to California? Don't you guys make wine over there? Why aren't you drinking your wine?" And I kind of was like, yeah, but we really like wine from other places too. And in that sense, it's also a very uniquely Swiss thing because they only export 3% of their wine. They drink all Swiss wine. But it's also it was a really funny story because it made
Well,
me sound like look dumb. I'm like we do have a lot of wine here. Why am I starting an import company? Good point. Um, but for me, I don't think it's pushback. I think it's just like there's a balance. I think it's nice to see places shift focus on domestic wines because, um, we're lucky, as you know, in California. There's a lot of different grapes being grown, a lot of varietals. Like
yeah,
there's every varietal I think is planted in California. Sometimes it seems like. Um,
yeah,
and so it's really cool when I get to see, small domestic producers, come out with, whatever, your pick pool and stuff like that, just grapes that I'm like, oh, cool. That actually might also help me, because someone might actually recognize one of my obscure grapes from the actual region where they grow it, but it's actually blended in to some, Lake County rosé or something. I don't know. There's some crazy stuff being grown everywhere.
it's true. That's funny. And obviously, I think there's your personal story is tied up in your business too. I think I can, I get a sense of that anyway. I get a sense of the passion that
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah. I
engaged.
mean, for me, it felt if it
You,
didn't feel like I didn't want to seem like opportunistic to be like I'm gonna go into Switzerland and these really weird. I was, like I said, I was born in Spain, and my family, they split time. I have some family in Switzerland and some in France. Um, So I have relationships in all of the countries where I work. So for me, it always seemed like this feels natural to kind of work as an importer because the phrase I always use is like I feel like I've been a cultural translator since I was little, even if it was like between my parents or my parents and whoever, my friends or whatever it was. And so for me, it becomes a very easy, it's a fun thing to do to act as like a cultural translator between wineries and regions and consumers.
yeah, that's very cool. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk about all this with me.
Yeah,
Is there
no,
any
it's
Yeah, how do people find out about you or find your wines or where, are you just
yeah.
local in
Well,
with
I mean,
Seattle?
the company is based here in LA. And so, I operate here in LA. I have a broker in the Bay Area. So, but I distribute all up and down California. So that's one of the things that, I guess hasn't been mentioned, but the wine market of California is constantly just like, uh, despite the fact that there's contraction happening or, maybe people are buying less or spending less on wine, every couple months I open up or some account in, Sacramento, Ojai, Joshua Tree, some beach town in San Diego, doesn't there's just so much. There's, I mean, like it's crazy. It really is crazy to think of how vast California is and how there's little pieces of the market that haven't seen as much dynamic wine as, you know, Silver Lake or Venice or
Right.
Oakland. There's a lot out there, and so that's pretty exciting. And for me, that becomes part of the game, or the adventure, is seeing where I can present some of my stuff. So to answer your question, yeah, you can find uh, Convivium wines up and down the state, but they're all relatively small productions. So people always say, which stores do you have it in? And I unfortunately have to always say, well, I can tell you the most recent places where this have sold, but oftentimes it just, moves in and out, because people shift their
Right.
inventory so
Right.
quickly.
Yeah.
And I don't have a ton. So sometimes it just sells out. Um, but yeah, I'm on
Yeah.
Instagram, Convivium at Convivium Imports. So you can always take a look there and uh, DM me there if you want to reach out and want to get a sense of what my book is all about. Also, my website. My website, I think. I mean, you saw it. I think it's pretty good. I feel like there's good information on there. It's a good, nicely comprehensive
Yeah.
look
It's
at
great. No, I mean,
the producers.
I loved
I
reading
try to,
about the producers. Yeah. And the maps
yeah.
is my
So
favorite thing, that you put a map for each of them. That's really cool.
yeah. So
But
nerdy.
also,
If there's
you
like,
do a. Go ahead. Go ahead.
no, I was just saying if there's something that I can add, like usually that's like nerdy, like I'm in. What can I do? Like just like for me, the map thing is I that was so like very important. When I was like, I want to embed a Google map for every producer so that you can zoom in and out, because sometimes people that gets lost too. People mention some appellation or some village, and that always frustrates me
Yeah.
even as a wine person, where they mention it. Oh, blah blah blah, and I'm like, I kind of do, but where is it in context of like like the broader things that more people know? So can I zoom out? Can you tell me what it's around? Like what's the nearest like city in
Right.
Italy that you are talking about? If it's in Marche, like that's vague to me, or whatever.
Right.
Um, yeah. Anyway,
And you do events, right? Like tasting events sometime? Is that something that
yeah,
people
yeah,
can
yeah.
find out about by Instagram?
Yeah. I usually post the tasting events on my Instagram. Like any good importer or distributor, I highlight producers, or I do a little like mini portfolio tasting at different, restaurants, bars, shops, pretty regularly. Just because, again, this book is relatively new, so it's kind of a fun way to kind of get it out there. And I like telling the stories. That's my favorite part, is actually the tastings, when I get to actually have consumers come into the shop or a bar and I get to talk to them about it. It's a blast, because then I can actually tell them those stories, and then I can see, like, that like kind of their that little spark in their eyes, being like, whoa, this is super unique. And I'm like, yeah, that's the fun part of wine. um yeah, and then and then I also do, maybe this is what you were hinting at, in the wintertime I do raclette pop-ups with my Swiss wines,
Yeah.
which is
Nice.
always
Yeah.
very popular.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. I still hope I can make one of those. Hope I'll coincide with my schedule. Um,
Yeah. They won't go away. That's something that people get very excited about.
awesome.
So,
Well, thank you, Dan. I really appreciate it.
no, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks again for listening. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I want to thank all of you who support this podcast through donations, Patreon subscriptions, sponsorships, or just posting a great review and telling a friend. You make this podcast possible, and I'm honored and humbled and inspired by your support. If you'd like to support this podcast, you'll find links to all the ways you can support it in the show notes. Now let me send you off with a bit of beauty and enchantment in the form of a recording I made one night on the banks of the San Benito River here, deep in the heart of Piscinas Ranch. I'm incredibly grateful to Colden Pro, the person who let this song pour from his very musical soul through a guitar into the night air as we celebrated the 21st birthday of Hannah Carrick, who momentarily added her voice to the music at one point. A special thanks to Bob Dylan for writing this beautiful music, to the moon and stars who provided lighting, to the crickets and the San Benito River who provided atmospheric accompaniment, and to the wine that brought us all together. I hope you enjoyed this magical moment as much as I did.